So The End of Nature was an example of a book whose timing was right. People were in their first throes of concern about climate change, and this was the first book about it to come out. And it was in part a book of reporting, and in part of amateur philosophy, lay theology kind of reaction to what we were finding out, to this idea that really was striking me, that the world was now crowded everywhere, that there was no place that was free of the imprint of human beings and what that meant. And my emotion was less, at the time, fear than a kind of sadness. My misconception was that we were engaged in an argument. We'd already won the argument, the kind of argument you could win with books and things. That, you know, science was very clear what was going on. We were just in a fight, and the fight was about money and power. That's what all fights are about. And we clearly weren't going to win that with another book. It wasn't going to move the needle at all. So that, at a certain point, is when it became clear we needed to do something else, organize. And it wasn't a natural thing for me, and still isn't. But it also was really interesting to try and figure out, given that the fossil fuel industry had all the money on Earth, trying to figure out what other currency there might be that we could work in.
I get the great joy of introducing Bill tonight. I know that's why we're all here. He's an inspiration because of his energy, his willingness to travel the globe year after year after year to tell us what we all need to do and how we all have to do it. From being just a writer, he's become an activist, and he is an activist for all of us to get to know, hear from, and he's in the fight for the long run. So I introduce you now to my good friend and my inspirational leader, Bill McKibben.
Well, Claire, thank you as always. First of all, my wife found a picture of me. See if I can, there we go. From back in that era when I was 27 and writing that book. And I put it up mostly just to demonstrate what 3 decades of thinking about global warming will do to a person. These are the pictures that came back from the Apollo mission in the 1960s, the pictures of the planet, the first glimpse we had of this blue-white marble floating in the black void of space, and everybody looked at it and said, wow, that's so beautiful, and look, you can't see any boundaries between countries when you look at the planet, and it's so fragile, and we will do all that we can to protect it. And then we didn't. Here's what that world looks like now. That's the Arctic, and about half of it's gone now. That's one of the biggest physical features on Earth. It should give you some sense of the kind of power that we've unleashed. There's the map of CO2 emissions over that same period of time. And as you can see, all the books in the world weren't doing much. Not only was it continuing to go up, it was going up at an ever faster rate. The extra heat that we trap with the carbon we've released from our coal and gas and oil produces the heat equivalent every day of about 400,000 Hiroshima-sized bombs. That's enough heat to melt a continent-sized, meters-thick, millennia-old sheet of ice. In fact, as we spewed carbon faster than any place in the geologic record, our one Earth was entering its 6th great extinction crisis. Everything had begun to change. It was only a decade ago that we learned that 350 parts per million CO2 was as much as we could safely have in the atmosphere. As of yesterday, at the machine at Mauna Loa that records all of this, we passed 412 parts per million for the first time in 15 million years on this planet. And we're obviously headed far, far higher because we haven't really taken any steps on the scale necessary to grapple with the problem that we've created, the biggest challenge humans have ever faced.
The fossil fuel industry has, by orders of magnitude, more money than the environmental movement could ever hope to have. We weren't going to be able to compete there. We're going to have to find a different currency to work in. And the only one that seemed on offer was, history suggested, the currency of movements. Passion, creativity, spirit, occasionally the willingness to spend one's body. So that's what we started trying to figure out how to assemble.
So we started organizing, and it turned out that there were all kinds of people all over the world who were already scared about climate change, but in a lot of cases thought they were all alone.
350.org started right as the internet kind of came of age, around 2008. Facebook didn't quite, it may have existed, but it wasn't yet a force, nor Twitter. Our killer app was something called Flickr, which allowed people to share photos easily around the world. And when we did our first big day of action, it was kind of smoke and mirrors. We knew that if we called for a big march in Washington, we'd only get 5,000 people, and that would be worse than not having done it at all, because it would demonstrate the puniness of the whole thing. But my guess was that there were a few people in every part of the world who were actually worried about this, and that if we could get them all doing things at the same time, it would have the appearance of something kind of large anyway. So we asked everybody to do things really in sort of iconic places the same weekend.
We told everybody to do this thing on a Saturday, okay, all around the world. Thursday, sitting around our little one-room office, we got a call from our organizer in Ethiopia. Like all of us a volunteer, like most of us a she, like a surprising number of us 17 years old. And she said, the government's taken away our permit for Saturday, so we're doing this today before they can stop us. She was in tears, not because it was, she should have been in tears because it was a scary thing to stand up to the Ethiopian government, but what she kept saying was, we wanted to do it the same day as everybody else. We wanted to be part of the whole world working on this. We're really sorry, we really apologize, and we have 15,000 young people out in the street right now chanting 350. So we were like, okay, don't worry about the date, Luau, you done good. And for the next 72 hours, these pictures just kept rolling in. That first day of action, there were 5,200 rallies in 181 countries. CNN called it the most widespread day of action in the planet's history.
As we had those demonstrations, those first round of demonstrations, people took pictures and uploaded them. So within minutes, sometimes there were 20, 30 pictures a minute coming in from around the world. And by the end of the weekend, people were thinking, not I'm the only person I know who cares about this, but I'm actually part of a fairly large, broad movement around the world.
You know, it just was an amazing day, and it's gone on to be an amazing day over and over and over again. We think that we've coordinated something like 20,000 rallies around the world now, and there are now so many others who are leading this movement around the planet. It's a collection now of environmental justice groups, of local people fighting coal mines and pipelines, of scientists, people of faith, frontline groups in countries and regions and neighborhoods that know all too well the price of fossil fuel.
I have never bought the alarmist hysteria attached to carbon dioxide as driving climate change. And there's, no consensus of scientists, I'm afraid. There are literally tens of thousands of people, scientists who have a different view on this. Now, over the course of time, a lot of the alarmist predictions and forecasts have been proved wrong. When will they finally admit that maybe it's not carbon dioxide? I absolutely support rational, sensible, environmental policies that are going to deliver real benefits. And no one in this room can tell me that the carbon tax, for example, is going to change the temperature of the globe one jot or one tittle. And that's why it's a ridiculous policy to pursue.
The really interesting part about this, okay, is that people who call themselves conservative are the ones who say, pay no attention to this. Radicals work at coal companies. People who are willing to alter the chemical composition of the atmosphere and just see what happens are behaving in a way that the most outlandish 60s radical never even considered. I mean, we are messing around with things that are at the absolute fabric of our planet, and we're doing it recklessly and carelessly. Even if carbon was doing nothing to the temperature of the planet, the fact that it's violently and quickly altering the chemistry of the oceans would be enough that we'd have to get off fossil fuel anyway. We're an ocean planet, and we're seeing the most radical changes in ocean chemistry that we've observed for hundreds of millions of years, happening in a blink of an eye. We went up on the Great Barrier Reef over the weekend from Port Douglas, and we dove at the spot where, if you watched Blue Planet 2, they filmed that incredible spectacle of the coral spawning, the sort of biggest fertility, display of fertility in the entire planet. And when we dove there, it was like diving in a car park. I mean, there was nothing left. That's how fast things now are changing.
We thought that, sometime towards the end of the 21st century, we'd be having trouble with things like coral reefs because water temperature would begin to rise. But the water temperature has risen very, very fast. And not only that, it turns out, and we hadn't anticipated this, that we're rapidly changing the chemistry of the oceans. And so what do you know? The Great Barrier Reef's half dead inside of 18 months, People who are young today will have such a degraded baseline against which to judge change that it won't seem as dramatic as it should. It seems you can find parts of it that seem like they're still beautiful, complex, buzzing, mysterious, all the things that a reef should be, and not have any idea that it's much less complicated than it used to be, and not be prepared for the fact that it's probably all going to go.
There is the odd sense of visiting a sick friend in the hospital. You're glad that there are a few small signs of life there, but you're extremely conscious that it's not at what it's supposed to be. It's actually a pretty awe-inspiring sight to see how thoroughly decimated this reef, which everyone, people have watched on TV, and it's one of the great reefs in the world, and now it isn't. And it happened fast, and it's no mystery why it happened. I mean, this is what climate change looks like here.
Even 10 years ago, the consensus, even 5 years ago, the consensus was we were looking at 1 or 2 feet of sea level rise this century. It's now very clear that we're going to be lucky to get away with 2 meters. And these, of course, are very scary numbers because that takes out every coastal city on the planet, you know? It's hard to overestimate what a shock climate change is going to be because we've spent 10,000 years building up a civilization in a very climatically stable world. So all the things that we're used to, where we put our cities, what our transportation corridors look like, where we grow our food, they're all evolved on that stable planet. And now that we're not on that stable planet, phew. These are those pictures from the war canoes that went off to Newcastle in 2014. And the reason I'm showing them to you is not just because they're wonderful to look at, but because they illustrate the trope, the idea that I want to leave in your mind about this fight, okay? Which is that it's a fight of the few and enormous against the small and the many. And that's one of the most archetypal fights in our kind of imagination as human beings.
Adani is planning to open a massive coal mine in the Galilee Basin in Australia's northeast. This is where Adani proposes to dig Australia's biggest and one of the world's largest coal mines. It'll span some 30 kilometres and at peak capacity produce 60 million tonnes of coal a year.
Mining means money, jobs and votes. The government has already given environmental approval for the Carmichael mine. It hopes its legal amendment will get around Aboriginal people's objections too. The best hope for the mine's opponents is to lobby financiers to boycott the project.
The project, if it is built, will create tens of thousands of jobs.
Adani have stated their intention to automate the entire project from pit to port. That's their words. They're intending to use remote-controlled or robot-controlled trucks, trains and loaders. Their stated intention is to reduce the amount of employment involved in this project.
So exactly where is federal Labor on this?
I support the Adani coal mine so long as it stacks up.
Australian politicians have received a friendlier reception. In recent years, a cavalcade of federal and state MPs have enjoyed the hospitality of Gautam Adani. Their trips have cost the taxpayer more than $300,000.
Thank you.
Yeah. Queensland Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk, a vocal Adani backer, is the latest to make the pilgrimage.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
This way, Premier. Thank you. Premier. Hello, Premier.
Stephen Long from Four Corners. Can I talk to you about Adani and the evidence of bribery and corruption?
I'm about to go into a caucus.
Have you read the report of the Ombudsman from Karnataka?
No, happy to have a look at it for you.
I think you should.
Yeah, happy to.
Have you seen the evidence of the shell companies they've set up linked to tax havens?
What I do know about Adani is it means thousands of jobs for regional Queenslanders, and I welcome you to go up there and talk to regional Queenslanders.
10,000 jobs when the Land Court has written to your government
you should go up there and talk to the people who have lost their jobs and they're hurting. And regional Queensland is hurting, and we will do everything we can to get people back into work.
Why are you giving them false promise by saying 10,000 jobs when the evidence says otherwise and the court has said that?
If the mine proceeded, this is the Carmichael mine, it would not increase the amount of global greenhouse gases or any environmental impact resulting from those gases. There would be the same or greater harm if the mine did not proceed.
We really like coal in Australia. It's almost sexual. Former PM said coal is good for humanity. We had politicians bringing lumps of coal into Parliament.
I watched the guy bring the pass around the rock to look at it. That was, and if you think about it, there's something, I mean, it's like they're all gazing in awe at what's really 18th century technology.
This is coal. Don't be afraid. Don't be scared.
The Treasurer knows the rule on crops.
It's coal. It was dug up by men and women who work and live in the electorates of those who sit opposite. From the Hunter Valley, as the member for Hunter would know. It's coal that has ensured for over 100 years an energy competitive advantage that has delivered prosperity to Australian businesses and has ensured that Australian industry has been able to remain competitive on a global market. Mr. Speaker, those opposite have an ideological, pathological fear of coal. There's no word for coalophobia officially, Mr. Speaker, but that's the malady that afflicts those opposite. But it's that malady, Mr. Speaker, that is afflicting the jobs in the towns and the industries and indeed in this country because of their pathological, ideological opposition to coal being an important part of our sustainable and more certain energy future.
These are not the guys to lead the way into the future if they're like gazing at lumps of coal.
The Minerals Council of Australia disagrees. This is a real ad they made. This is not a sketch that we made. This is a genuine ad that the Minerals Council of Australia put together in 2015. Take a look.
This can provide endless possibilities. It can create light and jobs, delivering $6 billion in wages for Australians. It produces steel and powers our homes, as well as our economy, injecting $40 billion each year, and it can now reduce its emissions by up to 40%. It's coal. Isn't it amazing what this little black rock can do?
All of Australia could be converted to renewable energy for 7.7% of the money in the super funds in this country. That's what it would take between now and 2030 to fund the transition to a new world. And we have to do it fast. If we're not going to do it fast, we're not going to make any difference because the climate is changing so fast that we need to move at that kind of speed.
There was a period of time when it wasn't clear what was going to replace coal and gas and oil. Renewables seemed too expensive and small scale and so on. But engineers did their job. Humans are really good at engineering. In the last 10 years, they've dropped the price of a solar panel off a cliff, you know. Wind power is now the cheapest way, not the most expensive to generate power. That means that if we wanted to solve this problem, we could. We have it within ourselves to do it. And it makes it all the more disgusting that we're not.
There was some optimism after the Paris climate talks, even if that agreement fell far short of what we needed. But that optimism faded fast when Donald Trump was elected president. The United States pulled out of the Paris Climate Accords. That is, for my country, the most shameful possible thing, that the country that's put more carbon into the atmosphere than any other is the only country on the planet who won't even provide lip service to the idea of ending global warming is tragic.
One of the reasons that one keeps coming to Australia is it should be one of those places that can do this. I mean, you know, lucky country, yeah, especially with wind and sun, you know, as much blessing from the natural world as it's possible to imagine. A small population, highly educated, good engineers, should be able to pull this off, should be able to think of something to do with yourselves other than dig up rocks and put them on boats to send to the rest of the world, you know? And Australia's role as a supplier of carbon to the rest of the planet is not something to be proud of at this point. It's helping tip us over the climate precipice fast. But Australia could play a really central role as a kind of demonstration of what can be done.
The climate fight's entirely about pace. It's all about how fast we move. We do not have time to do this on the gradual, easy pace that would be nicest for everyone. The physics of global warming is demanding that we move extraordinarily fast. We can no longer stop global warming. We can, we think, still keep it from getting entirely out of control. But if Australia seizes the moment, really becomes what it could be in energy terms, it could play a defining role in helping us get out of the fix we're in. We need everybody doing this. We need banks ceasing their loans to the fossil fuel industry. We need insurance companies making the financing of these projects impossible. We need to be leaning on them just as people have leaned on banks here to make sure that there's not anybody willing to lend money to that Adani mine or anything like it. That's powerful. That's important work. So many thanks to all of you who've done it. I'm not going to tell you that this fight is going to be easy, and I'm not even going to tell you that we're going to win, because we don't know. This is the first time test that our species has come up against. But you can see now what we couldn't know 10 years ago, which is that at the very least there's going to be one hell of a fight, and I am so glad that you are all in it. The message that we've been trying to get across is just this message about speed. We don't need people saying the right things about climate change anymore, though that's nice. What we need them is acting at a pace that matters. We have a chance here. We have a chance, and we are gonna make it happen together. Thank you all so much.